everyone. My name is Jian Kim, and I'm an assistant professor at Eastern Mennonite University, where I teach political studies. It's a great honor to be invited to your chapel today, and I want to especially thank Miss Andrea Schrock-Winger and Mr. Justin King for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts on politics and democracy in this challenging time. Some of you might think, oh no, like no more politics. I'm already sick and tired of people talking about politics and elections all the time. To be honest, I genuinely share your troubled emotions. Whenever I turn on the TV, read newspapers, it feels like political polarization has become so rampant, and it is eating up the American society from the inside. This us versus them mentality is dividing us into just two simple categories like red versus blue, right versus left, or friends and enemies. And yes, it has been a very challenging, very tough political season. And it seems clear that we will have to bear more of this challenge of division until the dust of elections settles down. So while observing this worrisome polarization, rise of political polarization as someone studying and teaching political science, I keep asking myself, is this what politics is all about? Is it natural to equate this kind of tribalism and even hatred with politics? And actually, about 100 years ago, there was a German political thinker named Carl Schmitt who argued that this is politics. He claimed that politics is basically about enmity and conflict, emphasizing that distinguishing friends from enemies is fundamental to politics. According to him, a political community can exist only when a group of people identify their enemies and destroy them. But do you know who picked up this idea? Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And we all know what happened next. The Nazi regime suppressed and literally eliminated the minorities and those who did not agree with their political ideology. So what worries me in this tumultuous political season is that many people in America now are fixated with and acting on this grim vision of politics, which is very dangerous. Recent polls and research show that the mutual animosity between Democrats and Republicans has reached unprecedented levels. And sadly, politicians have been fanning the flames of division instead of calling for unity. So as someone who studies and teaches political violence and reconciliation, I frequently refer to civil wars and genocides in many other countries like Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, Cambodia, Myanmar, etc. A troubling truth that arises by looking at these cases is that most horrific forms of violence, such as mass killing and genocide, almost always begin with everyday acts of dehumanization, such as stereotyping, labeling others with names, bigotry, and scapegoating, singling out certain members of that society for any unmerited blame. And such acts can easily and quickly become a slippery pathway to incite real actions of physical violence. So at the very, very basic level, we should keep in mind that we must universally uphold everyone's rights and the dignity of human life, above all our political disagreements. Now, that said, I'm not here to say that all confrontation is bad. Human societies are naturally plural, in that we cannot and do not have the same view on every issue. And we should expect to have disagreements among people. What I want to say is that contentions and confrontations are just one aspect of politics, not all of it. In other words, politics is something much bigger than finding and fighting enemies. Then what is politics, one might ask? I view politics to be something about how we find ways to live together, given people's irreducible differences. Every society has different groups of people with different interests and identities, and they have to find a way to deal with such differences. There can be various ways to cope with this challenge, and identifying some people as enemies and eliminating them is just one way. And in my view, and as you would agree with me, it's a horrible way that make us no different from the fascists who committed horrendous crimes against humanity. So while many of us take democracy for granted as a natural way of organizing political community, um, it has been only one of the handful solutions found in human history, with the continuous effort to find ways to cope with the plural nature of human societies, as we just discussed. The key feature which distinguishes democracy from other systems like autocracy is that it rests on a strong belief that we can work out our differences in a civil, nonviolent way with democratic norms and procedures, not by silencing different voices by brutal power, or not by wishing some charismatic leader would bring a miraculous harmony as authoritarian regimes do. Now, of course, democracy is not a perfect political system. It has its own flaws and weaknesses. In fact, political philosophers like Plato or Aristotle hated this idea and criticized for it being a mob rule. I mean, Athenians voted to execute Socrates, and democracy was used to ostracize someone, kicking someone out from their community. The founding fathers, as you all know, were also deeply concerned about the tyranny of majority when they designed American democracy. And along with, this spike of raw emotions surrounding this year's elections, many Americans are losing their confidence and becoming more and more unsatisfied with the way democracy is working in this country, as suggested by recent polls. And I assume many of you might feel the same, losing your faith in politics and democracy. But we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Despite its limitations, many would agree that democracy is the best available solution that we have for the challenge of managing our differences. I often hear my students citing Winston Churchill's famous quote, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. I think many of you would agree with this view too. That said, there's always a great possibility of leaving minorities unprotected in a democracy, as it is essentially based on a majoritarian rule. And our experiment of democracy still continues today, not only here in the US, but also in many other countries across the world. And we should continue our work to make political processes more just and more democratic as much as we can. It seems undeniable that this year's elections would leave deep wounds in American politics and society. There have been many harms associated with its process. People are feeling unsafe, and we may witness people arguing with or even hating each other even long after the election. The work to address decades-long problems of racial, economic, gender injustices also will remain with us, and the work will not be easy. However, as much as I do not want you to live in a fantasy world believing a false sense of unity, I also do not want you to become skeptics or lose hope by doubting your political efficacy. Now, some of us may have legitimate concerns and are wary of being co-opted by the state, so you may want to stay away from politics as much as you can. Nevertheless, let us not preclude our possibilities and see how our healthy and vigilant social engagement could actually contribute to real social changes and our work for justice. In closing, I would like to emphasize that democracy is not just about elections, as much as politics is not just about fighting. Some of you might think there's not much you can do when it comes to politics. And yes, you may need to wait a few more years to run for elections. And many of you may not be even eligible to vote yet. However, I want to emphasize that voting is just one way, one of the many ways of civic engagement and democracy. And there are many more, and oftentimes even more effective ways you can engage and positively influence the political system that we live in. This spectrum of civic engagement really ranges from individual micro level, like deconstructing your deep held assumptions or changing your lifestyle, positively influencing others through daily conversations, interactions with people near you, or through community organizations or peaceful civil resistance. The list goes on and on. And this spectrum ranges all the way to a much more macro level, critically asking how and why the current political and socioeconomic system came about, and asking if it is indeed a system of justice. What you need here is not money and power, but your will and commitment to bring positive changes to our society. So as true peace builders, I hope you pay special and close attention, especially to see how the most marginalized people and groups in our society are being treated by other individuals and by our political system and structure. As someone who studies political reconciliation and peace, I always try not to forget this phrase: there is no peace without justice. And I hope you share that same vision with me. With this vigilant mindfulness and courage to transparently name any uncomfortable truth of our society, I believe we could better follow our mission given from Christ. That is to love our neighbors as ourselves. Thank you.